Keanu Reeves had always been a private person, especially when it came to his philanthropy. For years, he had quietly donated millions to charities, funded struggling hospitals, and provided financial support to artists in need. But among all his philanthropic efforts, there was one project closest to his heart: Hope Grounds. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we have another special tale waiting just for you. Hope Grounds wasn't just another charity. It was a chain of nonprofit cafes designed to give at-risk youth a second chance at life. The idea was simple: provide employment, mentorship, and training to young people who had faced hardships such as homelessness, abusive homes, or time in the foster care system. Keanu had launched the first cafe in Los Angeles with the dream of making a tangible impact. Over time, the concept flourished, and Hope Grounds expanded to multiple locations across the country. Each cafe operated as a safe haven, a place where young people could learn skills, regain confidence, and work towards a brighter future. Yet despite its success, something didn't sit right with Keanu. Recent reports from his managers revealed declining employee morale. There were whispers of unfair treatment by supervisors, complaints about the rigid work environment, and even rumors of mismanagement, funds meant for employees allegedly disappearing. Keanu knew that if he wanted to uncover the truth, he couldn't just rely on reports. He needed to see it firsthand. And so, he devised a plan. For 1 week, Keanu would go undercover as Kyle, a temporary kitchen helper at one of the busiest Hope Grounds locations in New York City. To pull off the disguise, he let his beard grow out, donned thick glasses, and dressed in secondhand clothes. With a fake resume and a little help from a trusted friend inside the company, he secured a job at the cafe, stepping into a world he had built but never experienced from the inside. On his first morning at Hope Grounds, Keanu stepped through the door and took in his surroundings. The cafe exuded warmth, with soft lighting casting a golden hue over wooden tables and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Customers lined up, some tapping impatiently on their phones while others exchanged sleepy greetings. Behind the counter, baristas worked swiftly, pouring lattes and arranging delicate pastries on display trays. But something felt off. His manager, a burly man with tired eyes and a permanent scowl, barely acknowledged him. "You're the new guy?" Frank grunted, not bothering to look up from his clipboard. "Kitchen's in the back. Stay out of the way." It wasn't the warmest welcome, but Keanu had expected that. He had worked enough odd jobs before fame found him to recognize a tough boss when he saw one. Still, as he tied his apron and got to work, it didn't take long for him to notice deeper issues. The employees moved like shadows, silent, drained, and worn thin by the weight of their work. Their eyes held exhaustion, their movements mechanical, their smiles, when they appeared, fleeting. Orders were piling up, and customers grew restless. Keanu watched as baristas fumbled with cups, their hands shaking from fatigue. But what disturbed him most was Frank. The man's voice was sharp, slicing through the cafe like a whip. "Hurry up. Don't just stand there looking dumb. God, how hard is it to make a cappuccino? If you screw up again, don't bother showing up tomorrow." Keanu clenched his jaw. He had seen tough bosses before, but Frank's cruelty was relentless. He wasn't just demanding, he was demeaning. Employees flinched at his words, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched, and yet, no one said a word. No one fought back. Then there was Lucas, a young barista with warm brown eyes and a gentle demeanor. Lucas stood out. While everyone else dragged themselves through the shift, Lucas radiated kindness. He greeted every customer with a genuine smile, remembering names, asking about their families, making each person feel seen. When Frank snapped at a struggling coworker, Lucas would discreetly step in, handling the order himself before Frank could escalate the situation. If someone looked overwhelmed, Lucas took over a task without hesitation, offering quiet reassurances that kept them from breaking under the pressure. Keanu watched in silence, his curiosity growing. How did this kid manage to keep his spirit intact in a place like this? Then, Something happened that stopped him from getting a cold. An elderly woman approached the counter, her hands trembling as she counted out a small pile of coins. Her thin, wrinkled fingers moved slowly, hesitating over each piece as if trying to stretch what little she had. Lucas leaned in, his voice gentle. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove. The usual?" She nodded with a weak smile. "Yes, dear, but—" She looked down at the counter, her expression clouded with worry. "I think I'm a little short today." Without missing a beat, Lucas reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and covered the difference. "Don't worry about it. You're good here." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She placed a frail hand over his. "You're an angel." Keanu stood frozen, his heart tightening. Why? Why was this young man, who barely made enough to support himself, so willing to give? In a place where kindness was scarce, where people were struggling just to get by, Lucas still found a way to lift others up. Over the next few days, Keanu kept a close watch on Lucas. The young barista carried himself with quiet resilience, moving through each shift with an unshakable kindness that stood in stark contrast to the harsh environment around him. While the cafe bustled with impatient customers and overworked employees, Lucas remained a steady presence, offering a warm smile and a reassuring word to anyone who needed it. Keanu quickly noticed that, unlike the others, Lucas never rushed out after his shift. Most workers were eager to leave the moment their time was up, escaping into the night with exhaustion written across their faces. But Lucas? He lingered. Even when his responsibilities were done, he stayed behind, wiping down tables, double-checking the stock, and scrubbing the kitchen until every surface gleamed. It wasn't required of him. No one asked him to do it. Yet, he did it anyway, ensuring the cafe was left in better shape than he had found it. One evening, as Keanu stood by the window stacking chairs, he noticed Lucas stepping outside, a bag of leftover pastries tucked under his arm. A teenage boy sat huddled against the brick wall, his hoodie pulled tight against the biting cold. The boy was barely more than skin and bones, his face hidden beneath the shadows of a nearby street lamp. Keanu watched as Lucas knelt beside him, placing the bag in the boy's hands with a quiet word and a small, reassuring smile. The boy hesitated for only a moment before tearing into the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. Lucas gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze before heading back inside, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Another time, a delivery driver staggered into the cafe, visibly drained and frustrated. Keanu had seen Frank berating him earlier, blaming him for a late shipment. The man slumped against the counter, rubbing his temples in exhaustion. Without a second thought, Lucas poured a fresh cup of coffee, slid it in front of the driver, and waved away his attempt to pay. "It's on me," he said simply, his voice kind but firm. The driver blinked, surprised, before nodding in quiet gratitude. Lucas just offered a small smile and returned to work without expecting anything in return. Keanu's curiosity only grew. He had met generous people before, but there was something different about Lucas. It wasn't just small acts of kindness, it was something deeper, almost instinctual. He needed to understand what drove him. One night, during a rare quiet moment on break, Keanu, still in disguise as Kyle, finally asked, "Hey, man," he started casually, leaning against the counter. His tone was light, but his eyes were searching. "Why do you do all this?" Lucas, who had been stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, hesitated. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, a nervous habit Keanu had picked up on over the past few days. For a moment, Keanu thought he might deflect the question, but then, after a deep breath, he answered, "I grew up on the streets," he admitted, his voice quieter now. His gaze dropped to the table, as if revisiting memories long buried. "I know what it's like to have nobody looking out for you. People don't realize a simple meal, a hot drink, it can mean everything when you're starving or freezing." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. Lucas wasn't looking for pity. There was no self-indulgence in his words, only the raw truth of someone who had endured struggle and knew its weight firsthand. Later that night, Keanu learned more from Maria, another worker at the cafe. As they wiped down tables, she glanced over her shoulder to ensure Lucas wasn't nearby before speaking in a hushed voice. "Lucas doesn't talk about it much, but he was abandoned as a kid," she revealed. "Lived in shelters, bounced around foster homes. Now, he's trying to put himself through college." Keanu listened in silence, his jaw tightening as she continued. "He never complains, never asks for help, but I see it. Some nights, he doesn't even eat his own dinner. He just gives it away." Maria's voice softened, her expression troubled. "He acts like he's fine, but I know better. He's always giving, always looking out for everyone else. I just wish someone would do the same for him." Keanu clenched his fists under the counter, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and admiration. Here was a young man who had been dealt an unfair hand, who had every reason to be bitter and resentful. And yet, instead of closing himself off to the world, he had chosen to be a beacon of kindness, to lift others up, even when he had nothing himself. And yet, Frank treated him like dirt. Keanu exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had seen enough. Enough of Lucas struggling while others took advantage. Enough of Frank's cruelty going unchecked. He wasn't going to stand by any longer. It was time to take action. By the 5th day, Keanu knew it was time to act. The weight of everything he had witnessed, the mistreatment, the exhaustion, the quiet kindness overshadowed by cruelty, pushed him to finally reveal the truth. Hope Grounds was meant to be a sanctuary, a stepping stone for those in need. But under Frank's management, it had become something far from its purpose. That was about to change. That night, after the cafe had closed and the last customers had trickled out into the quiet, dimly lit streets, Keanu called for a staff meeting. Employees exchanged uncertain glances, whispering amongst themselves. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Frank stood off to the side, his usual smirk in place, arms crossed over his chest as he leaned against the counter. He exuded the same dismissive arrogance he always carried, completely unaware that his reign of unchecked authority was about to crumble. "What's this about?" Frank scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Some big announcement? We don't have time for this." Keanu stood in the center of the room, his presence commanding yet unassuming. His heart pounded, but his expression remained calm and composed. Slowly, methodically, he reached up and removed his glasses, then wiped away the fake beard. As he pulled back the hood of his worn-out sweatshirt, his true identity emerged. Silence slammed into the cafe like a thunderclap. Maria gasped audibly, clapping a hand over her mouth. Lucas' eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. One of the newer employees dropped a rag onto the floor with a soft thud, but it was Frank's reaction that was the most satisfying. His smug grin melted into a look of pure disbelief, then fear. "I'm Keanu Reeves," Keanu said, his voice steady and firm, yet carrying an undeniable warmth. He let the name hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I founded Hope Grounds, and I've been working undercover here for the past week." A stunned hush filled the room. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of his words pressed into the walls of the cafe, the reality of the moment sinking in like an unavoidable wave. Then, Keanu turned to Frank. His eyes darkened, his voice sharp enough to cut through the thick tension. "I've seen how you treat these employees. The way you insult them, overwork them, make them feel small." His tone hardened, each word deliberate and forceful. "That ends tonight." Frank straightened, his face flushing red. His usual bravado faltered, but he still held onto a sliver of defiance. You can't just..." "Yes, I can," Keanu interrupted, his voice firm but controlled, unwavering. His piercing gaze never left Frank. Hope Grounds was built to uplift, not to break people down. "And you're fired." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The room collectively held its breath. Maria's eyes darted between Keanu and Frank, her hands clenched into fists. Lucas, frozen in place, looked between them, waiting for what would happen next. Frank's mouth opened and closed, his confidence shattering like fragile glass. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Keanu cut him off, his patience worn thin. You've turned this place into something it was never meant to be. You don't belong here." Frank clenched his jaw, fists tightening at his sides, his face burning with humiliation. But he knew there was no arguing against the truth. Without another word, he turned and stormed toward the exit, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. A collective exhale rippled through the cafe. It was as if a storm had passed, leaving behind only the crisp, cleansing air of renewal. Keanu let the moment settle before turning his attention to Lucas. The sharp authority in his voice softened as he met the young man's gaze. "And you," he said, stepping closer, his voice carrying something deeper, something filled with genuine admiration. "You are exactly the kind of person this place was meant for. You care. You give, even when you have nothing." Lucas swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I wasn't doing it for recognition," he murmured. His voice wavered, but his sincerity was unwavering. "I just wanted to help." Keanu's lips curved into a small smile. "And that's why you deserve it." The tension in the room shifted, the energy transforming into something hopeful, something alive. Right there, in front of everyone, Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Lucas' shoulder, effective immediately. "You're the new store manager." Gasps filled the room. Lucas blinked, stunned. "Wait, what?" Keanu grinned. "You're getting triple the salary, better hours, and more support. You've earned this." Lucas. Lucas' hands trembled slightly, his breath coming in shallow spurts. He looked around at his coworkers, their faces filled with pride and encouragement. Maria wiped away fresh tears. Nodding at him, he turned back to Keanu, searching his face for any hint of a joke. But all he found was unwavering sincerity. But Keanu wasn't finished. "And one more thing," he added, his voice full of warmth. "Your dream of college? It's taken care of. Full scholarship. No more working 2 jobs just to survive." Lucas' knees nearly buckled. His eyes welled up with tears as he struggled to find words. I don't know what to say." Keanu chuckled, squeezing Lucas' shoulder. "Say yes." Lucas exhaled shakily, nodding as emotion overtook him. "Yes." A cheer erupted in the cafe. Maria beamed, clapping her hands together. The other employees cheered, some whistling, others rushing forward to hug Lucas in congratulations. Keanu stepped back, watching the scene unfold. This was what Hope Grounds was meant to be, a place of growth, of opportunity, of second chances. And finally, it was back on the right path. As Lucas stood there, overwhelmed with gratitude, but filled with new determination, Keanu knew without a doubt this was only the beginning. Word of what had happened at Hope Grounds spread like wildfire. The story of the undercover boss who exposed a toxic manager, rewarded an unsung hero, and breathed new life into a struggling cafe captured hearts everywhere. News outlets covered the transformation. Social media was flooded with praise, and customers lined up outside, eager to witness firsthand the place where Keanu Reeves had made a difference. But for Keanu, it was never about the headlines. It wasn't about the fame or the applause. It was about restoring the soul of Hope Grounds and proving that kindness and integrity still had a place in the world of business. The changes were swift and meaningful. Keanu wasted no time in implementing reforms to ensure that no employee would ever feel undervalued again. He introduced a mental health program, offering free counseling and stress management workshops. Wages were raised significantly, no more struggling just to make ends meet. He revised the cafe's policies, ensuring fair treatment, better hours, and work-life balance. Hope Grounds was no longer just a place to earn a paycheck. It was a place where employees could build a future. Inspired by Lucas' quiet acts of generosity, Keanu created an employee crisis fund. Whether it was for medical emergencies, housing difficulties, or tuition support, workers would always have somewhere to turn in times of need. The very spirit of giving that Lucas had embodied was now embedded in the cafe's mission. A month later, Keanu returned, but this time, he wasn't undercover. He walked through the doors of Hope Grounds in broad daylight. No disguise, no hood pulled over his head, just himself. The moment he stepped inside, he felt it, the shift, The energy of the place had changed entirely. The cafe, once heavy with stress and tension, now radiated warmth and life. The scent of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. But there was something more, the sound of genuine laughter, of conversations unhindered by fear. Employees greeted customers with bright smiles, their shoulders no longer weighed down by dread. The cafe wasn't just thriving, it was alive. And at the counter stood Lucas. Gone was the exhausted, overworked barista who barely had time to catch his breath between shifts. In his place stood a leader. Lucas wore his new manager's uniform with quiet confidence, his movements fluid and assured. There was something different about him, something steady, unshaken. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. Keanu approached the counter, leaning against it with an easy smile. "I'll take a coffee," he said, his tone light, but his eyes filled with something deeper, pride. Lucas turned, and the moment he recognized Keanu, a slow grin spread across his face. But he didn't rush. He didn't fumble. He crafted the coffee with the same care he had always shown. Methodical, precise, yet filled with warmth. When he finally placed the cup in front of Keanu, he held his gaze. "This one's on me," Lucas said, his voice carrying a playful edge, but his eyes shining with something else, gratitude, respect, understanding. Keanu let out a deep, hearty laugh. "I should have known you'd say that." They shared a look that needed no words, the kind of look exchanged between two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side. A look of mutual respect, of appreciation, of knowing that something had shifted in both of them. Around them, customers and staff watched, smiles tugging at their lips. Hope Grounds had become more than just a cafe again. It had become a symbol of second chances, a place where kindness wasn't just encouraged, it was the foundation. A place where hard work was recognized, where people mattered, where change wasn't just a possibility but a reality. Keanu took his first sip, letting the warmth of the coffee settle in his chest. But it wasn't just the drink. It was the moment, the realization that sometimes all it took was one decision, one person believing in another, to start a ripple effect of change. Lucas folded his arms, tilting his head slightly. "So, what's next, boss? Another undercover mission?" he teased, a hint of mischief in his voice. Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe, but for now, I think I'll just enjoy my coffee." But even as he said it, he knew deep down, this wasn't the end. The world was full of places like Hope Grounds, places where people were waiting for someone to notice them, to believe in them, to give them a chance. And maybe, just maybe, there was another story waiting to be told. Hope Grounds had found its way back, but Keanu had a feeling this was just the beginning. Part 6, Another Chance. A few months later, Keanu found himself walking into another one of his cafes. This time in Chicago, he had been keeping a close eye on all of his Hope Grounds locations, ensuring that the changes he had implemented were taking hold. But there was nothing quite like showing up in person, seeing the people, feeling the energy of the space. The cafe in Chicago was different from the one in New York. The layout was modern, sleek, and designed for efficiency. The aroma of fresh-baked pastries and espresso filled the air as customers bustled in and out, their chatter blending with the hum of steaming milk and grinding coffee beans. As Keanu stepped inside, he kept a low profile, wearing a casual jacket and cap. He watched the employees carefully, observing how they interacted with customers and each other. Most seemed happy, engaged in their work. But one caught his attention almost immediately, a young cashier with tired eyes and a nervous energy. She looked to be in her early 20s, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Every so often, she would glance toward the back of the cafe, as if expecting someone. Keanu ordered a black coffee and stepped to the side, listening carefully. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't accept that coupon. It expired last month," she explained gently to a customer. Her voice was polite, almost too careful, as if she had learned the hard way not to upset people. "That's ridiculous," the man snapped. "I come in here all the time. Can't you make an exception?" Keanu watched as she bit her lip, her fingers fidgeting slightly against the counter. I really wish I could, sir, but it's policy. I can offer you a discount on today's purchase instead, the man huffed, tossing his expired coupon on the counter before stomping away. The cashier exhaled, shaking her head before turning to the next customer with a forced smile. Something wasn't right. Keanu waited until the rush died down before stepping forward again. Hey, that guy earlier, does that happen a lot? He asked casually. The cashier blinked, caught off guard by the question. Oh, it's fine. People get upset sometimes, she said quickly, waving it off. But Keanu could tell she wasn't being honest. You don't have to just accept that. You know, he said, his voice calm but firm. Customers shouldn't be treating you like that. She hesitated, looking around as if to check if anyone was listening. It's just part of the job, she finally muttered. It shouldn't be. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, searching his face as if trying to decide whether or not to trust him. Are you a regular here? She asked instead, steering the conversation away from herself. Keanu smiled, shaking his head. Something like that. What's your name? Mia, she said hesitantly. And you are? Keanu paused for a moment before replying. Kyle, he said with a smirk. Mia's lips twitched into a small smile. But before she could say anything else, a voice cut through the cafe. Mia, my office. Now. A middle-aged man in a pressed suit stood in the doorway to the back office, arms crossed over his chest. His expression was one of irritation, his tone sharp enough to make Mia flinch slightly. She shot Keanu an apologetic look before quickly setting down her apron and hurrying to the back. Keanu's jaw tightened as he watched her disappear through the door. Another Frank, he thought grimly. He waited. 5 minutes, then 10. The manager never re-emerged, and neither did Mia. Something about it gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the back. Sir, you can't go back there, another barista called, but Keanu ignored them. He pushed open the office door and found Mia standing in front of the desk, her head lowered as the manager berated her. You're lucky I even keep you on staff, the man was saying. You're replaceable. You know that? I could have 10 people in here tomorrow willing to take your job for half the pay. You should be grateful. Keanu's blood boiled. Is that how you talk to your employees? He said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. The manager turned, clearly ready to scold whoever had interrupted him, until he realized who he was looking at. His mouth opened, then closed again, his face paling. Mr. Reeves, he started, his voice suddenly unsure. Keanu's expression was unreadable. I've been listening, and I don't like what I hear. Mia's eyes darted between them, confusion and disbelief etched on her face. Effective immediately. Keanu continued, his voice cool but authoritative. You're done here. Hope Grounds has no place for managers who belittle their employees. Pack your things. Now. The man sputtered, but there was no room for argument. The decision had been made. Mia looked at Keanu, her eyes wide. You're, she breathed, realization dawning on her. You're Keanu Reeves. He smiled. Yeah, and I think it's time we made some changes around here. A new beginning. Again. Hope Grounds wasn't just one cafe. It was a mission, and as Keanu looked around, he knew there were still plenty of places that needed saving, and he wasn't done yet. Stepping inside and shutting the door behind him, the manager turned, clearly ready to scold whoever had interrupted him, until he realized who he was looking at. His mouth opened, then closed again, his face paling. Mr. Reeves, he started, his voice suddenly unsure. Keanu's expression was unreadable. I've been listening, and I don't like what I hear. Mia's eyes darted between them, confusion and disbelief etched on her face. Effective immediately. Keanu continued, his voice cool but authoritative. You're done here. Hope Grounds has no place for managers who belittle their employees. Pack your things. Now. The man sputtered, but there was no room for argument. The decision had been made. Mia looked at Keanu, her eyes wide. You're, she breathed, realization dawning on her. You're Keanu Reeves. He smiled. Yeah, and I think it's time we made some changes around here. A new beginning. Again, Hope Grounds wasn't just one cafe. It was a mission, and as Keanu looked around, he knew there were still plenty of places that needed saving, and he wasn't done yet.